My daughter showed up at my door on a Tuesday afternoon in early December, and I almost didn't recognize her. That's not an exaggeration. It had been 4 years, 3 months, and I'm not proud that I counted 11 days since Claire had last spoken to me. I know the exact date because it was Thanksgiving, and she had called to tell me she wouldn't be coming. Not that year, not any year going forward. She said I had been too involved in her life, that I had overstepped with her husband, that she needed space. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone, looking at the sweet potato casserole I had made for 12 people, and I said, okay, what else was there to say? After that, nothing. No birthday calls, no Christmas cards, no texts. I sent a card when I heard through my sister that Claire had gotten a promotion at work. It came back unopened. I stopped sending cards after that. So when the doorbell rang that Tuesday and I looked through the peephole and saw my daughter standing on my porch with her hair shorter than I remembered and a cloth tote bag over one arm, my first thought was that something terrible had happened. That was the only reason I could imagine she would come. I opened the door. She smiled. It looked practiced, like she had rehearsed it in the car. "Hi, Mum," she said. "I was in the area. I thought maybe we could talk." I stepped back and let her in because she was my daughter and I had spent 4 years wishing for exactly this moment. I told myself not to ask too many questions. I told myself to just be grateful. She sat at my kitchen table and I made coffee and she talked about the drive down from Portland and the traffic on I-5 and a restaurant she had tried recently that she thought I would like. Small talk, careful talk, the kind of conversation you have with someone you don't fully trust yet. I answered her questions and asked a few of my own and tried not to look at her too long in case she could see how much I had missed her. Before she left, she reached into that tote bag and pulled out a small glass jar. "I've been making jam," she said, sliding it across the table toward me. "Strawberry, from the berries we grew in the backyard this summer. I remembered you always liked strawberry." The jar had a little handwritten label on it. Her handwriting. I recognized it immediately, the way she made her lowercase r's with that small loop. I had seen that handwriting on 100 birthday cards and school projects and grocery lists she used to leave on my refrigerator when she still came to visit. I picked it up and turned it over in my hands. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. She left 20 minutes later. We hugged at the door, the careful kind of hug where neither person quite commits. I stood on the porch and watched her car pull out of the driveway, and I cried a little, standing there in the December cold, because it had gone well. Or at least I thought it had. I thought maybe this was the beginning of something. I put the jam on the kitchen counter and looked at it for a while. That Friday, my neighbor June came over for coffee. June has lived next door to me for going on 16 years. She was one of the first people who called me after my husband passed, and she is one of those rare people who knows exactly when to talk and when to just sit with you. I love her like a sister. She noticed the jar immediately. "Oh, that looks beautiful," she said, picking it up and examining it the same way I had. "Where'd you get this?" I told her Claire had brought it. I tried to say it casually, but June looked at me over the top of the jar with that particular expression she has, the one that says she heard everything I didn't say out loud. "That's something," she said carefully. "It is," I agreed. June spread some of the jam on the toast I had put out. She said it was delicious. She had 2 pieces. I had my coffee and we talked about her grandson's school play and the gutters I needed to get cleaned before the winter rain started, and whether the new family on Birchwood Drive had a dog or just a very loud toddler. She went home around noon. By Saturday evening, she texted me to say she wasn't feeling well. Stomach cramps, she said. Probably something she ate. I sent back a heart emoji and told her to drink plenty of water. Sunday morning I called her because she hadn't responded to my check-in text from the night before. No answer. I called her daughter, who lived about 40 minutes away, and she said she hadn't heard from June since Friday either, which was unusual. We agreed that Nora, that's June's daughter, would drive over to check on her. Nora called me back 45 minutes later. Her voice was very controlled in the way voices get when someone is trying not to panic. June was being taken by ambulance to Providence Medical Center. She had been found barely responsive. Her blood pressure was dangerously low. The doctors didn't know yet what had caused it. I drove to the hospital. I sat in a waiting room chair that was upholstered in a color I can only describe as institutional beige, and I drank terrible coffee from a machine, and I waited. Nora arrived, and we sat together, and she kept checking her phone, and I kept thinking about Friday morning, the toast, the jam. I don't know exactly when the thought arrived. It didn't come all at once, the way revelations do in movies. It crept in slowly, the way a draft comes under a door. By the time I was fully aware of it, it had already been sitting in my chest for a while. June had eaten the jam. June was in the hospital. I pushed the thought away. Claire had brought me that jam as a peace offering. She had made it herself in her own kitchen, from berries she had grown. That was not the kind of thing a person contaminated. That was not something a daughter did to her mother. I drove home that evening with the doctor's voice in my head. Unknown cause, possible toxin exposure. They were running tests. I walked into my kitchen, and I stood at the counter, and I looked at that jar for a long time. I am 63 years old. I have lived long enough to know that the thoughts you don't want to think are sometimes the ones you most need to think. I have lived long enough to know that love, real love, the deep tidal kind, does not protect you from being wrong about the people you love. I picked up the jar. There was still jam in it, maybe a third left. I put the lid on tightly and I put it in a Ziploc bag, and I put that in the back of my refrigerator behind the leftover soup where I wouldn't have to look at it. Then I sat down at my kitchen table and I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I thought about my daughter, not the daughter who had shown up Tuesday with her careful smile and her practiced warmth. I thought about the past 4 years, the silence, the returned card. I thought about her husband, who had never liked me, not from the first time I met him at a dinner in Portland, where he spent the entire meal talking over Claire, and barely acknowledged me when she introduced us. I had kept that opinion to myself, mostly. I had tried. But there had been one Christmas, the last Christmas before the silence began, when I had said something to Claire privately, gently, about a comment he had made that worried me. And she had looked at me with something I couldn't quite name and said, "Mom, please stay out of it." 3 months later, the Thanksgiving phone call. "You've been too involved. I need space." I sat at my table and thought about all of this, and I hated myself for thinking it. And I kept thinking it anyway. The next morning I called my friend Barbara, who had worked as a lab technician at OHSU before she retired. I asked her if she knew anyone who could test a food sample discreetly. She asked me why, and I told her I was worried something might have spoiled, and I wanted to be sure before I threw it out. She gave me the name of someone she knew. I drove to a part of town I didn't usually go to, and I left the jar. I felt like I was in a movie I hadn't chosen to be in. While I was waiting for the results, I went to see June. She was awake by then, sitting up in her hospital bed, looking smaller than she usually did, connected to an IV, her color not quite right. She smiled when she saw me come in, and I had to hold myself together very carefully. "They still don't know what's wrong with me," she said. "Running more tests?" I held her hand, and I didn't say anything about the jam. I told myself I was waiting until I knew something for certain. I told myself there was no point in alarming anyone over a suspicion. But the truth, and I have had to be honest with myself about this, is that I was also afraid of what being certain would mean. If I said it out loud, it became real, and if it was real, then my daughter had tried to kill me, and some part of me was not ready to know that yet. I want to be clear about something, because I have thought about this a great deal since. I was wrong to wait, I know that now. June was in that hospital bed because of a jar that had been in my kitchen, and I owed it to her to tell the doctors what I suspected as soon as I suspected it. My fear, my need to protect myself from a truth I didn't want, nearly cost my dearest friend her life. That is something I carry with me and will carry for the rest of mine. On Wednesday, Barbara's contact called me back. The jam contained a concentrated extract of lily of the valley. It's a plant, beautiful white bell-shaped flowers that grow in gardens all over Oregon. Most people don't know that every part of it is highly toxic. It causes exactly the symptoms June had been experiencing: vomiting, low blood pressure, irregular heart rhythm. In high enough doses, it can cause cardiac arrest. I sat in my car in a parking lot on Burnside, and I read that information on my phone 3 times. Then I called the hospital. I asked to speak to June's attending physician. I told him what I had found out. I told him about the jam, and I told him about the test results, and I gave him the name of the substance. His voice changed when I said it. He said they would start targeted treatment immediately, and that I needed to come in and speak with him in person, and that I needed to call the police. I called 911 from that parking lot. I want to say I felt certain and resolute when I did it. The truth is, I sat there for about 2 minutes first, shaking with my phone in my hand, trying to make myself dial. Not because I didn't know it was right, but because the moment I made that call, there was no version of the future anymore, where this turned out to be a terrible mistake. There was no version where I had misread things, and Claire was innocent, and we could still somehow find our way back to each other. I dialed anyway. 2 detectives came to my house that evening. They were professional and kind in the practiced way that detectives are, which is to say they were thorough and they didn't let me see what they were thinking. I gave them the Ziploc bag with the original jar. I gave them the contact information for the lab. I told them everything about Tuesday's visit, what Claire had said, what she had brought, how long she had stayed. One of them asked me if I was aware of any reason someone might want to harm me. I thought about my will. I had updated it 2 years ago after a conversation with my financial advisor. I had left a portion of my estate to the hospital that had treated my husband in his last weeks. A meaningful portion. Claire knew about this because I had told her directly during one of the few phone conversations we'd had before the total silence began. She had not taken it well. She had said I was being impractical, that family came first, that my husband would have wanted his estate to stay in the family. I had said my husband had specified no such thing and that this was my decision to make. She had not spoken to me again after that call. I told the detectives about the will. I told them about the call. I watched one of them write in a small notebook, and I felt very calm and very hollow, the way you feel after something enormous has happened and your body hasn't caught up yet. They arrested Claire 4 days later at her home in Portland. Her husband was questioned as well. I don't know all the details of what they found during the investigation because the detectives were not able to share everything with me. What I do know is that they found search history on her laptop going back 8 months. Searches about toxic plants. Searches about what amounts were lethal. Searches about how long certain substances took to metabolize. 8 months. She had been planning this for 8 months before she knocked on my door with a jar of jam and told me she had made it from berries she grew in her backyard. The jar she brought me was the second attempt. I learned later that she had sent a package to my house in October, some homemade granola, that I had never received because I'd been visiting my sister in Arizona for 2 weeks. The package had been left on my porch and then removed, presumably by Claire herself when she realized I wasn't home. I think about that a lot. I think about how many times she must have thought about this, planned it, changed her mind, and then decided to continue anyway. June was in the hospital for 11 days. The treatment worked once the doctors knew what they were dealing with. She came home on a Thursday afternoon, and I was there when Nora brought her inside, and I made her soup, and I sat with her while she ate it. And I didn't try to explain or justify the 2 days I had waited before calling the hospital. She didn't ask me to. That's the kind of friend she is. We have talked about it once since then, directly. I told her I was sorry. She told me she understood, that I had been trying to protect myself from something no mother should have to know. I told her that was a generous way to see it, She said that was the only way she intended to see it. And then she asked me if there was any more soup, and I went and got her some more soup, and we didn't talk about it anymore. Claire's case is still making its way through the court system. I have been told not to discuss the specifics publicly, so I won't. What I will say is that the process is slow and strange, and there are days when I find my name in places I never expected to see it. There are days when I have to be very intentional about not reading things on the internet. My son-in-law, Claire's husband, filed for divorce shortly after the arrest. I have complicated feelings about this that I have mostly kept to myself. There is a question I get asked, in various forms, by people who know what happened. It is usually phrased gently by people who care about me and are trying to understand. The question is some version of, "How are you doing, really?" The honest answer changes depending on the day. Some days I'm fine. I make my coffee and I walk to the end of the street and back because my doctor told me I need more movement in my life. And the December roses at the corner house are still blooming somehow, and I think about June coming over on Friday and the chicken salad I plan to make. And I feel not happy exactly, but okay, present, grateful for ordinary things in the way you become grateful for them after something tries to take them from you. Other days I think about that jar sitting on my kitchen counter, the handwritten label with the small looped R's, and I think about all the years I spent wishing my daughter would find her way back to me, and the grief of it is not clean or simple. It is not the grief of losing a stranger. It is the grief of a specific kind of love that persisted too long past the point where it was safe. I think the hardest thing is not the fear, or the court dates, or the way some people look at me now with that particular mixture of pity and fascination that I have come to recognize. The hardest thing is that I still have to talk myself out of making excuses for her. Even now, knowing what I know, there is a voice somewhere in the back of my mind that says maybe she was not well, maybe something happened to her that I don't understand. Maybe if I had done something differently years ago, this would not be where we ended up. I have a therapist now. She is very good, and she does not let me get away with that kind of thinking, which is exactly what I need. What I know is this. I am 63 years old, and I am alive, and June is alive, and the roses at the corner house are blooming in December against all reasonable expectation, and sometimes that is enough to build a day around. I kept one thing from all of this, not the jar. That was taken as evidence, and I never got it back, nor would I have wanted it. What I kept was the small moment on Tuesday afternoon, before any of this, when Claire was sitting at my kitchen table and the winter light was coming in through the window, and I was pouring coffee, and for about 30 seconds I genuinely thought that everything might be okay. I know now that it wasn't. I know now that she was already planning what she was planning, that the visit was part of it, that the smile at the door had been rehearsed. But in that 30 seconds, I didn't know any of that. In that 30 seconds, I was just a mother who had missed her daughter, standing in her kitchen in December, hoping. I think I'm going to let myself keep that 30 seconds. Just that. Nothing else. I've been sitting with this story for a while now, trying to figure out what to make of it. Not the legal part. The lawyers handle that. I mean the human part. The part where you ask yourself how something like this happens and what, if anything, it means. Here's what I keep coming back to. Claire didn't become who she became overnight. Neither did I. We built this together, slowly over years of small moments. Things I said, things I didn't say. Things she decided about me that I never got the chance to correct. I'm not saying I caused what she did. I want to be very clear about that. But I am saying that cause and effect in families is almost never a straight line. It's a slow accumulation, and by the time you can see the shape of it, you're already living inside the consequence. What I wish I had understood earlier, and I mean years earlier, not days before she knocked on my door with that jar, is that love without honesty is not actually love. It's a performance of love. I performed for a long time. I kept the peace when I should have named the problem. I stayed quiet when I should have spoken. I told myself I was being kind, being patient, giving her room, but patience without truth is just avoidance wearing a softer coat, And avoidance, I have learned, does not make hard things smaller. It makes them worse. There is also this. I almost let my loyalty to a feeling cost June her life. That is the part I'm least proud of. When the thought first arrived, the thought about the jam, I pushed it away because I was not ready to act on what it meant. That was a failure of courage. Not the dramatic kind. Not the kind you can excuse by saying the situation was overwhelming. It was a simple, ordinary failure of will. I knew what I needed to do, and I waited 2 days because doing it required me to give up something I was still holding on to. My own grief mattered more to me in those 2 days than June's safety. I have to live with that. What I want to say to anyone listening who is in a situation where they know something and are waiting, stop waiting. The truth does not get easier to face with time. It only gets more expensive. Whatever you are protecting yourself from, by not looking directly at it, I promise you the cost of not looking is higher than the cost of knowing. And then there is the part about resilience, about what you do after. I am not a naturally resilient person. I don't wake up every morning with a clear sense of purpose and the energy to match. Some mornings I wake up and the first thing I think about is that jar on my counter, and I have to make a deliberate choice to get up and make coffee and walk to the end of the street and come back. That's it. That is the whole practice. Small, repeatable, unspectacular choices to keep going. June came over last Friday. She brought a tin of store-bought cookies because she said she was done with homemade for a while, and we both laughed, and it was the first time in months that laughing felt completely uncomplicated. I think that moment, that ordinary, small, uncomplicated moment, is what I mean when I talk about surviving something. Not that the hard thing goes away, just that eventually there is also that,